Sasha Stevenson from Section 27. She's Executive Director there. Good afternoon, Sasha. Thank you very much for joining us. After 8 years, your quest for accountability and justice for those Life Esidimeni victims has brought us to this very moment where former Health MEC, Ms. Qedani Mahlangu, and then Head of Mental Health, Dr. Manamela, have been found to have caused the death of those 144 patients. Your reaction to this?
Thank you, Griselda. I think, like Christine, we're very relieved that Judge Teffo has found that Ms. Mahlangu and Dr. Manamela created the circumstances in which deaths were inevitable. That was a quote from Judge Teffo. This is, as Christine said, a tragedy of incredible proportions. There were so many people who died. There were so many people who suffered, and for two government officials, one high-level politician, to have these kinds of findings made against them, I think is really important for the families, for everyone who's been watching, and also for accountability more broadly. It sends a message that you can't take this kind of decision and implement this kind of decision without accountability. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important for all of us to see. And it's really heartening that Judge Teffo has made this decision. And now, of course, it's for the NPA to decide on prosecution. And we trust that they will do just that.
Mm-hmm. And possibly it will serve as a deterrent to would-be offenders, such as Ms. Mahlangu in this instance, because it could have been easy to just place the blame on the NGOs, because essentially that's where these healthcare users died. So it could have been easy to just hold them accountable and leave it at that. But surely a very strong message being sent here when you find a top official who has at every turn insisted that I was a political deployee. There were people who were on the ground who were reporting to me. I should not be held accountable, just as much as she eventually said that even her senior, Mr. David Makhura, then Premier at the time, if he was not to be held accountable, then she shouldn't, because he was the one chairing the budget committee.
Absolutely. It would be, the people died within NGOs, but they died within NGOs having been moved as a result of the decisions taken and implemented by government, and not just by government broadly, but by people within government. And so, as you say, this does send a really important message that you can't recklessly take decisions, and you can't continue to ignore the warnings of families, of experts, of organizations within civil society who say, right from 2015, when we started working on this case, this is going to be dangerous. And if you don't ensure that people are safe, there are going to be devastating health consequences. Devastating health consequences was something that was in a letter in early 2016. And yet those things were ignored. And I think it's an important message that for people working within government, they need to be listening. They need to be listening to the people who know what their family members need, who know what mental health care users need, because they're psychiatrists and psychologists working in the system, and who are within civil society and acting in the interests of people and concerned about what's going to happen. So yes, I think this is an important message that has gone out. It's an important end in itself. Just this finding is really important to the families and to all of us who have been working on this for such a long time, because it's a court decision. But it's not the end. It's not the end of the process. We still have more to go, and that's where, as I say, the NPA comes in.
Mm-hmm. You speak of psychiatrists. I remember quite vividly as well that it was not just civil society. When there was the exchanging of letters around 2016, the marches, you also had specialists, experts in this field of psychiatry, who also wrote and expressed to her of the dangers of prematurely transferring these mental health care users. But it seemed everything was ignored.
Absolutely. I think what's notable there is that there were experts outside of the department. So the South African Society of Psychiatrists very clearly expressed in both meetings and in writing their concerns about, first, when the plan was just to decrease the number of beds at Life Esidimeni, they expressed those concerns. And then when it became clear that the plan was to move everybody out, they very clearly expressed their concerns, and they were just ignored. And then importantly, there were also experts from within the department who were also ignored. And so there was a real culture of closing of ears to any kind of dissent. And it's that closing of ears and that dedication to pushing forward with a project that was clearly going to go badly and that was beginning to go badly, it was that caused the deaths of so many people, and it's that the judge has made a finding against.
Throughout this period, either it be the arbitration or even now the inquest, there have been thought leaders that have said the whole concept of deinstitutionalization of mental health is not necessarily a bad one, that sometimes there can be benefits when you reintegrate some of these mental health patients into society, but most certainly that this was a disaster because the timelines were truncated. There was never going to be a time where you could have transferred such a huge number of patients within a period of 6 months.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to recognize that deinstitutionalization itself isn't the problem. In fact, it's certainly good practice for a lot of people when done in the right circumstances. But there are two things. The first is that it isn't for everyone. There are some people who do need to live in institutions, and many of the people who were living in Life Esidimeni at the time of this disaster were people who did in fact need to live in institutions. Mental health care users get periodically assessed every 6 months by a multidisciplinary team that decides what kind of care they need, how they're doing, and whether the care should change, whether they should go to somewhere other than the institution they're in. And the periodic reports that we saw, all of them said this person should not be moved. So for individuals, it's not always the right thing. But the second thing is that for deinstitutionalization to work, there needs to be a strengthening of community mental health services. That means clinics need to be capacitated. They need to have psychiatrists and psychologists visiting. They need to have psychiatric nurses who are able to care for mental health care users when they come in to receive care. And then they need to be supporting the NGOs or the family homes that people are living in. And that prior work didn't get done. And that was what SASOP was concerned about from the very beginning. That's what was being warned about from the very beginning. So we had the confluence of two disasters, the lack of capacitation of community mental health care services, and then the assumption or supposed assumption that everybody can be deinstitutionalized. And those two things led to a real disaster. But both of those things were things that had been warned about before the decision was taken, and then once it was taken, before the movement of people started, and yet those warnings, as I say, were ignored.
And then, Sasha, on the constitutional damages, we understand that some families have not received a penny to date. What is your understanding around this? What is the status there?
So everybody who was involved in the arbitration, everybody that we represented in the arbitration, was paid the constitutional damages within the period required. There were some people who then came forward after the arbitration, and there was a process that was put in place to assess whether the person who came forward was the appropriate family member, and in some cases to allocate some money into a guardians fund for mental health care users who in fact survived. So that has been the process that we haven't actually been involved in, but that has been more difficult. And I understand there are some people who haven't received payment. But I must give credit to the Gauteng government in that the decision of Justice Moseneke came out in early 2018. And within a matter of just, I think, about 2 months, everybody who was required to be paid under the arbitration award was in fact paid. So that area of accountability hasn't been perfect, but it has been quite good. This now is the next area of accountability, and it's an area that, as Christine said in the insert before, is really important to the families, because it's this idea of individual criminal accountability, the fact that you can't make a decision and leave it to government broadly to deal with, that in fact, if you make a decision, if you implement a decision, it is for you to bear the consequences thereof.
And then on the 44, we keep hearing that 44 individuals are still unaccounted for.
Yes, so I think the fact that there are still people unaccounted for bears testament to the chaotic nature of the moves. The fact that there have been various different records, that it was often not clear where people were moved to, even in the immediate aftermath of the moves, shows that there were real record keeping problems and real problems in care. And so there have been attempts by the police to locate people, but this is precisely what was warned about again beforehand, that when you conduct a chaotic deinstitutionalization project, you end up with people who go missing, who end up on the streets, who end up in jails. That's the nature of the beast when you are conducting a project badly. That was warned about. No heed was paid to those warnings, and now we're in a situation where at least 144 people died, where many more people suffered greatly, and where indeed there are some people whose location has still not been found.